the shows you've been doing before you came to Japan were two-night affairs, right? It would be like one performance over 2 nights.
Yeah.
Whereas in Japan you were forced to do a single show, which seemed to be sort of a compendium of all you've done thus far, including your first songs with the Teardrop, I suppose. Yeah, so we're first of all to assume that.
The reason being, I play more in Britain. People know I can do stuff that's more obscure, and people will come. For a start, it's a lot cheaper in Britain.
Oh, yeah.
You know, people are going to come to one night mainly here. So I didn't want to presume. I'd like to be able to do two different shows, but I get that for the amount of people who are there 2 nights, who feel ripped off because they don't see enough songs. There's enough people who would go, well, why didn't he do so and so? And I do feel that if I come to Japan every 2 years, so in a way I feel that I really got to give them something that I can enjoy performing and not feel that I'm giving them too little.
Was this particular show, or this particular show you're doing this time, like a compendium of your entire career, though? Or is it the same approach you always take? Do you always try to pack everything into the show when you come to Japan?
Well, I think with this album, because it's a double album for a start, it means I have to play more of that. I normally take into consideration what I've played in countries before. I played a lot of stuff last night that I actually hadn't played in this country. I did very little from the last 2 albums, because there was so much from the new album, and I know in the past that I will sometimes ignore the whole Teardrop Explodes career. But that's really my way of shying away from a lot of my contemporaries still rely on, say, their first album. I'm lucky in as much as my first album was not the best album I made. So I try to do as much as I possibly can just to place things, you know?
Yeah. You assume that you left out the songs from the last record because the concept of that album, the concept of the most recent album are so different. You're just trying to get away from that stage.
Yeah, I think what tends to happen is my most recent album, after the new one, tends to be overlooked. I think that's probably I could find that if I went back to every album, the previous one. I think that maybe that's just there's a hesitancy, but also I think the Nation album was far more of an intellectual proposition, whereas this album is the Nation album was the most intellectual proposition album I've ever got to. Most of my albums tended to be more of an intuition thing. Now I'm running entirely on intuition again, so anything intellectual is kind of I'm shying away from.
But depending on the artist, the Japanese audience can be quite reserved, quite withdrawn. He seems to think that the fans of last night's show at the Sun Plaza were even more so because they were seeing a new Julian Cope, someone you hadn't quite expected. Did you sense that at all? And if you did, how did you deal with it? You also noted that you seem to be very generous or very tolerant of such an audience.
Yeah, I think that what people get is quite often not what they expect. I think that when people say the times that I've played, the other times that I played in Japan, I was very different from times from before. I do go through phases. I think the fact that I arrived with body makeup and shorts is going to be inevitably an estranging proposition to an audience that last saw somebody kind of sinewy and leather-clad. If the audience likes it, that makes me very happy. If they don't, so long as it reflects where I'm at, then I'm fine with it.
If they don't like it, and it reflects where you're at, what do you mean?
If the audience does like it, then it makes me very happy. I always want the audience to love it. I want to be loved, because everybody wants to be loved, you know? But if they don't love it, I would prefer to give them something that was truly me, that they didn't love. than give them something that was. I'm not very good at doing something that's just for other people.
You like to surprise?
Yeah, I do really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So last night you didn't sense anything unusual then in terms of response you got? Or you don't really notice that much?
I think I'm going through a period of confrontation, in a way, with myself as much as anything. One of the things that I find very interesting is that I want to get my point over, but I don't want to not... I've always had this thing with all my favourite artists. They look good. They have an awareness that the image, as much as it's a superficial bullshit, is nevertheless important. Even the great romantic poets were all into their clothes and stuff like that, you know? I'm not one of those people who says, well, I really want the music to stand for itself. I think that the greatest art is not serious art, it's transcendental art. It's far out. And all the best artists, even when they were making shitty art, their lives at that point were still interesting enough for people to be interested in them. So, I think my ability to confuse is neither good nor bad, it's just there. Do you think that the difference between my 1989 performance and my now performance was too much for the audience?
逆に質問したいんだけども、89年 first half of the show, the people seem to be a bit withdrawn, trying to get into it, but maybe they seem to be left out, and then from Dope and Speed, when the music sort of picked up, took on a rock and roll age, then things were sort of back to normal again.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm always going to have that problem, and I think when I go into cultures that are so different, I'm going to have even more problems, because a lot of the time people are liking me for reasons that in actual fact are probably the opposite of what I'm intending. You know?
Yeah.
Like, I will say something that's entirely ironic, if a lot of the time people will actually see it entirely face value. So, especially when I went through this period for the last two albums of presenting the kind of the ultimate wasp trip. The ultimate wasp trip to me was always like meant to be tremendously tongue-in-cheek, but the Japanese will interpret it as being far straighter, because they find Western people. There's a symbolic beauty about Western people, which is lost as soon as you start gooning around.
Okay.
I don't know if that's translatable. That was more to you than anybody, I think.
Okay. He was with a friend of his at the show, and the friend was saying, in the case of Julian Cope fans, there's probably the attraction to you is a combination of both love and hate on the part of the fans.
Right. Yeah.
They hate you as much as they love you.
Oh yeah. I think that's quite worldwide. Thank you.
This may miss the mark, but you were saying, like, the last time you were here, you were into that Wasp parody type of thing, whereas he saw it more, maybe the other fans here saw it as more of a masculine Julian Cope, whereas this time it was more of a feminine Julian Cope. And in being feminine, you sort of return to what you really are. What's the word for somebody who's like half masculine, half
Not hermaphrodite. That's neither, is it?
Yeah, right. I can never think of this word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You would say maybe we're to assume that this is the real you this time, whereas last time it was sort of a masculine parody.
Oh, I think yes. Yeah, I think that it's not that I'm naturally effeminate, but I am naturally. The only way that I can take on real masculine stuff is for it to be almost like a send-up of the phallus, you know? Because I have to say that I'm very anti phallic thinking. I do still think far too much with my dick. So from that point of view, I'm always overcompensating. I have this new image with this new phrase, right, which the group describes as the hard puff.
So I guess it's not too far off the mark.
No, it's very close, yeah.
Yeah.
Being in a man's body, which is a kind of a personal thing. And the image being that I love men. I think they're brilliant, but I don't have any physical attraction to them. So much so that sometimes I can be kind of quite sexual with them without even thinking of it being sexual. Because I always figured that if I was a woman, I would love women. You know? I'm so... It's kind of an obsession that way. The last time you translated stuff, we had this kind of conversation.
No.
It's the same kind of...
Actually, last time the guy was more caught up with your criticism of Western civilization.
Right. Oh, I bet he loved that.
Equally edifying. Yeah, 前回この話しなかった had said in a previous interview that what you do tends to invite misunderstanding because it's very eccentric. Do you think you're being understood more now, or you're as eccentric as always and continuing to be misunderstood?
I think I'm trying to foist understanding onto people, you know? What I found was that I would put a lyric sheet in, and it would not make it any more edifying, because we were still talking across cultures. I found that I would be ironic on a Liverpool level, because I was from Liverpool. People in London don't have the same sense of irony. So to actually get to America, and to get to Japan, people can actually be into me for entirely the opposite reason that I'm doing it. I can either complain about that, or I can try and take steps. I feel at the moment that I don't want people to like me for the wrong reason. I feel I would rather people come out of, say, the new album, Peggy Suicide, at least being very disappointed sometimes, because they think, oh shit, this is what he means. But I want them to know that. I want them to know. Because there's nothing worse than the artist complaining, oh, you know, nobody understands me. Because, really, I think that I have a duty to be understood.
Do you think other artists are understood? Do you think you're one of the more misunderstood people? Or it seems like natural to me that people are going to be misunderstood.
I think people are just going to be misunderstood, yeah. I think that the art trip, in a way, it has to be somewhat eccentric because it's defining the barriers of society. If I'm not living out, not so much on the edge of society, but at least if I'm not establishing this is what your parameters are, then everybody's doing it. That's what I worry about when I see everybody taking acid. The only problem with everybody taking acid is that it just means that society, rather than being loose, just gets slack. You can't have hydraulic machine operators taking acid. So, you know, so if it's like, say, when I was on stage last time, I did this in Tokyo. I did this ritual stomach kissing thing, and I did it as a kind of I wanted to show that you could do this and still be smiling and feel and look very benign. But in actual fact, it made far more sense with the Japanese psyche, because they kind of, rather than laughing at it, they were like, "Oh yes," you know. It seemed to make more sense, and it was meant to not make any sense at all. So I was just confusing the issue even more.
Was there any special reason for your abandoning the Wasp parody thing? I mean, he said he found that quite stimulating, quite exciting. I guess you just have to go in cycles. Is that what we're assuming? Or was there any particular reason for getting out of that phase?
I was getting too anal. It's okay to look up your own ass, and even to invite your friends. You know, I think that's really the way technology has pushed us. But there's something about the feminine side, which is the intuitive side, which started to shout in my ear, which started to say, okay, you've said that, but you're belabouring the point. One of the reasons that I was so obsessed with putting down the Wasp was because the Wasp had been so much in the ascendant for so many years. I feel that I've put the Wasp down so much now. I feel that in a way I've served an apprenticeship, right? I feel far more a part of the world than I ever used to. I don't feel like some isolationist asshole like I used to. I feel like I feel like I fell in love far more with the human species than I've ever been in love with it before. And from that point of view, I wanted to write that my race is not the only fucked up race. We're all fucked up. As an island, part of an island race, I'm very aware that the Japanese are very messed up. The Japanese have a tremendous inability to recognise that the rest of the world exists. I know, and I understood that, but to be able to put myself in a position to say that, you've got to be very much show that you're not just somebody who's pointing fingers at other people. So my apprenticeship was like, I pointed a lot of fingers at me and my kind first.
I see. You got that out of your system.
Yeah.
Now it's somebody else's turn.
Yeah, it's somebody else's turn. We're all going to get it.
Okay. For mankind now.
It's a terrible thing to say because it's such a thing that's happening at the moment. But I seem to have a lot of waking dreams that are more than just waking dreams. For years and years, I took a tremendous amount of hallucinogenics. Right, I took LSD by the carton. I stopped in 1985. And I thought that anything that had any kind of occult experiences, any shadowy experiences, had been brought on by hallucinogenics. The last 2 years, I've had a lot of occult experiences, which are very obviously not to do with hallucinogenics. They're far more kind of they have some kind of religious background. The intellectual side of me laughs out loud at all these things, but they still happen.
Well, when you say waking dreams...
waking dreams as in seeing things as somebody who's quite versed in meditation, they have nothing to do with meditation. They're of a different consciousness to meditation. Mm-hmm. So I started to find that a lot of these things that were happening, I'd go and see people, friends, or teachers that I knew, and say, I've been having this and this experience. And they'd say, well, you should read this book and this book in that case, because those people talk about that. And I found that a lot of things that I do really follow a pattern, like a real kind of classic pattern. I'm not in a hurry to interpret them, but at the same time I've nevertheless got to be aware of them. As much as my intellectual side is laughing at them, my female side, my intuitive side, has to take them seriously, because I do set myself up as somebody who listens to himself. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of why I find myself in this position at the moment.
What sort of pattern are you talking about then? Like what exactly type of phenomena?
Well, things like when I say waking dreams, I mean I've had some really bizarre things, like things like 9 o'clock in the morning. The only thing that I can compare them with is like visions. Mm-hmm. And I know that's a ridiculous thing to say, but it's still there. Mm-hmm. So as much as they're the kind of things where I write down in my book, okay, unfortunately this sounds like a whole crock, but nevertheless it's something that is appearing to me. Mm-hmm. So what I want to do is, rather than just ignore that, because that's too much to think about, is to try and establish what those patterns are, whether they truly mean something. And because so many people are running around, there's so many personality cults around and mystery cults at the moment, that we inevitably seem to run to whenever civilization starts to teeter. You just go back in history and people are doing that all the time. I just wonder if Jung might not have been a little bit more right when he says that the collective goes through these phases where people do start to have revelations, whether they might not be revelations. And because I've always believed in the great prophets, I truly believe that Muhammad came down as an antidote to Christ. One of the things that I find so valuable about Islam is its ability to accept Christ as the fourth prophet of Islam, and the only way that they don't accept him is his divinity. So from that point of view, I think I've got to have some kind of understanding, more than just an intellectual understanding. So long as I have the intellectual perspective to laugh at myself, then I'm okay.
How does that connect with what we're talking about, your renewed appreciation for people?
Right. In simple terms, by seeing something which I never believed in, I started believing God, right? I now believe in God. I don't believe in God as in the name God. I believe in God as in whatever the creator spirit is. If I'm talking to a pagan, then I'll call it the goddess. If I'm talking to a Muslim, I'll call it Allah. But what I'm talking about more than anything is I have a tremendous appreciation for people who believe. Even if what they believe is, you know, I've got a born-again Christian friend who's always telling me that I'm damned. You know, there's something fascinating about her true belief that I am damned. I kind of appreciate that there's that much belief. And it's like Jung says, it's now in the 20th century almost impossible for an educated man to show any belief because his friends are too busy laughing at him for him to ever get that out. I thought, okay, what I do is I accept the gales of laughter, but I still say it. So by doing that, I accept. Before I used to think I was the classic, what can we as individuals do to help the planet, right? Who cares about the planet? So long as mankind as a species maintains, we're cool. Now I feel that I'm nothing. I accept that I'm absolutely nothing. But nevertheless, as much as I'm nothing, I'm still a speck. Because I now accept myself as a speck, I somehow seem to fit in the jigsaw of the world. And by accepting myself, I like myself far more. And I find that I see the rest of the world with a renewed appreciation. Because I notice that everybody is a speck. And everybody is a speck with a tremendous potential. So that's why my love, it's just a welling up, you know?
You've gained perspective.
I've gained a perspective. It isn't just me who exists anymore. It makes me far greater the fact that I accept everybody else now. Before I was into this kind of total isolation, you know?
That's interesting. Peggy Suicide deals with environmental issues, but in a very personal way, not in a U2's soapbox type of way.
Yeah.
That's his impression, first of all. What are the major differences you see between your approach to that issue and other people's approach to the issue, because it seems to be very much in vogue now?
Yeah. My way can the only reason that I've done it is because my intuition told me to. I tell you, my intellect told me to keep the fuck out of it. You know, because I hate that stuff. The reason I stayed away from it, and we almost reluctantly did something like this, is because rock and roll reduces things to facile 10-point plans to save the world, you know? Okay, kids, we can do it in 40 minutes on an album. Do this and this and this, and we'll all be cool. What I wanted to do was just open the whole can of worms. Just say it all sucks. And we can change things. But it isn't a one-year thing. You two as Christians know that they should do. They should care about the world. They have an intellectual awareness of saving the world. Like Sting has it's an intellectual thing, you know? They can write a good song, and they can fulfill a certain role. But what I wanted to say was I wanted to reclaim caring for the weirdos. Because at the moment, you immediately get bracketed with the straight people. Only the straight people can care about the world. In the same way as anybody who hears Nancy Reagan say, "Just say no to drugs," is almost drawn straight to the syringe. You know, it's an inevitable thing. What I want to say is, people in the 1990s, unfortunately because of the 80s, they want to be hip. What you got to do is it's horrible to say, but you've got to turn caring into hip. You've got to make it hip to care. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to do Peggy Suicide. I wanted it to be far out. I wanted it to be a double album. I wanted it to be this kind of... There's a song on the album called Safe Surfer, which is a song about safe sex. But what it is it's not, "Oh guys, we should all be wearing condoms." What it is it's a guy singing to a woman, "I'm not like the rest of them. We don't have to wear a condom because I'm cool." And the chorus is, "You don't have to be afraid, love, because I'm a safe surfer, darling." It then becomes kind of mantric, and it becomes so ominous because you just know this guy he's bullshitting. But the great part about it is I thought, if I'm going to do a song which is about safe sex, it's going to be so sexual that people inevitably want to fuck to it. Because to do it in a finger-pointing way is horrible. Because everybody's just like, who the hell's this guy? Yeah, I did 2 anti-driving songs, and both of the anti-driving songs are just so grooving. You just got to get out there and drive across America listening to them. That's the way, because that's the absurdity of life. You know, that it means absolutely everything, but you can snuff it out in an instant.
Yeah.
And I don't want to... rock and roll doesn't have to be a series of facile answers. It can be brilliant. And there's nothing better for me than working within rock and roll, because people are always trying to trivialize your trip. So if there's people always out there trying to make whatever you do trivial, then that's great, because you've got to mean it so much more.
So the word used there, absurd, I think maybe you sort of struck a familiar chord. Maybe that's a point in common in your approach there, a preference for the absurd.
Yes,
the absurd
I
approach.
think so, yeah. Because it's really easy to say, well, I'm a serious artist. You know, to have a series of photos taken where you're in a good suit. You know, we recorded this in a good studio, therefore I must mean it. I don't think that means anybody means it at all. I just think it means that they spend a load of money and they might not have a clue. I find that the greatest wisdom that I ever find is in the most unexpected places. I started quoting Funkadelic because George Clinton came up with so much of genius, but in a state where people would say, yeah, but he's just a toughest rocker. But the greatest stuff is just so close to being off its rocker that most of my heroes were either off their rocker one time or so close to it that, you know, that it made no odds.
The absurd.
The absurd, yeah.
Absurd.
Yeah.
You mentioned Safe Surfer, and he commented that there was opinion to the effect. I guess there was something about being gay in there or something.
One of the lyrics is about the lyric is, and I saw my old man exploding out of a tunnel. I knew what came next. The downfall of the distant gaze. It's yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So somebody interpreted that as a reference to AIDS, and maybe you're making a point that AIDS is part of the process of natural. What's the word for when everything gets extinct? Natural selection.
Yeah.
Natural selection. I guess the word. Your reference to that. In other words, AIDS being a phenomenon that's unavoidable to mankind, part of the natural selection process. You know, survival of the fittest.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. See, the thing is that I felt that it's very difficult to make comments. You know, you can't. It's very hard to make like an anti-gay comment in a song about AIDS. But at the same time, you've got to inform people that it began with some kind of gay sex. Because otherwise, you're not doing your duty. You know?
I see. So you were just fitting it into the most...
I was fitting it in as I was making a comment. I was saying, this is where it started.
Mm-hmm. I see.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an overall sort of pessimistic tone over here, saying the end of the century, that kind of thing. And people sort of equate this with the end of the world. There's been these books about the predictions by Nostradamus, and they're selling like hotcakes over here,
right?
Because they're very sort of end of the world type of thing. How do you see this sort of thing?
I use CE in all my lettering, my dating, 1991 CE as opposed to AD. CE being Common Era. 1991 is it's only AD in terms of Christianity. In terms of Japan, it's not 1991. For the Japanese psyche to be quaking in its boots because of a Christian number is outrageous. I like CE because it accepts 1991, but it doesn't say it's only common to everybody in the world. Explain that, and I'll say. Yeah, another thing you see is like we didn't start using AD until 527. So I mean, by 527, it could be 100 years out. Really?
It could be wrong.
It could just be wrong. Yeah. The Roman Empire in 313 AD took on Christianity, right? But they didn't start using but they're still using the Roman Roman start of the world. The Roman start of the world starts in 446 BC, so they were using that. So it was a tremendous hindsight thing that they said, oh well, it's probably here.
Yeah.
You know, so we can't start shitting ourselves because it might be here. I put on the inside sleeve towards 2012. And the reason I put it towards 2012 was just a little psychological device. The Incas in 3113 BC, all the shaman witch doctors they left society. They went off into the hills and they said, the end of this phase of civilization comes up now. We cannot help society through this phase. It's going to be a 5,225 year process, and that's the next phase of civilization, which turns out to be 2012. I figured, I don't believe that it's 2012, but the idea being that if you can at least make people think, oh well, we don't have to start worrying until 2012, at least we can get over the worry of 2000. You know?
Well, the point being that anybody can arbitrarily, give their figures that much importance.
That's it, yeah. I mean, it's 6,000 and something in the Hindu calendar.
Right.
Heaven forbid that the whole world would start quaking. It's 7,000. We're always fucking up.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the way that the psychology of mankind's collective mind works is that if you do get to 2000 thinking the world's going to end, it could possibly end. But I tell you what, Christianity in the 900s was messed up. Until about 985, Christianity had fallen so far. And then around 990, everybody started going, ooh, it's nearly 1,000. They all ran back into the church. The reason the 1200s and the 1300 AD period was so heavy for the Christian church was like, well, we got them back in the seats. Let's keep them here. Because we don't want those problems to be happening again. That's why we have the problems with Islam. It's the 13th century in Islam. Think of how vehement and insane Christianity was in its 13th century. So we've got this kind of slack period, and suddenly we've got Muslims feeling very, very vehemently about their religion. Year is it in Japan?
The third year of the Heisei year.
Right.
They go by emperors here.
Right. So if it's the third year of the Heisei emperor, what would be, that means you're always talking in quite short numbers, aren't you? Small numbers.
Yeah.
How would a Japanese talk about 600 AD?
They use the Western.
But how would they in terms of the East?
In the history book, what they'll do is they'll use the name of the era, they put a number on it, and then in parentheses afterwards we'll have it in the Western.
If they didn't have the Western thing, what would they do?
They wouldn't have anything.
Doesn't that give them a very weird sense of history?
Yeah, so things just change, if it's your era, that's it.
So you live for now?
Traditionally, yeah, traditionally.
So say the place where I did my Peggy Suicide sleeve is a cromlech from the Neolithic period. It's 2,500 BC. Would a Japanese not have any concept of the 2,500 BC? Is that too much?
They would put it down 2,500 BC.
But to get an awareness of 2,500 BC, they could only get an awareness through a Western.
Through a number. Western. See, they study world history the same way we do. And when they study world history, they use those Western years.
So Japanese awareness of their ancientness, does that not give them less of an awareness of their ancientness?
No, not at all. Not at all, because they use both systems.
When did they start using the Western system?
From 1867, I think.
So before that, how was history taught?
I don't know.
Did you just have to learn all your emperors going back?
They used the names of whoever was the emperor or the shogun at the time. And back, I guess, the scholars of old would have to just memorize the rulers like they would memorize an alphabet. And that's how they would...
Wow.
Probably. That's their just...
Yeah.
Because like now they just use the Western equivalent.
Do Japanese people find it easier to use the Western than the Eastern?
So some scholars of old who had like a real knowledge for what history was.
far out.
Now, you have to bear in mind, in China, they actually do have a calendar of their own, and they're in like the year 3000 something right now.
Right.
Yeah.
And 3000 starts what? Because of what?
I have no idea. 中国また俺も3000いくつでしょうね。始まったかっていう。South Korea here. Yeah, we don't know when or why China started its own particular calendar.
Right.
So, yeah, you have to look that one up. Get out the old Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah.
But in the case of Japan, though, it was the scholars who had the knowledge of that.
So in a way, when oral traditions break down, awareness of the past
Absolutely, yeah.
kind of decimates.
But they have written records of this stuff from I don't know when, but from.
But if it is only the scholars,
Yeah.
it puts psychologically it puts people's heads into a feeling of when they're alive is it.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, but Japan didn't have a written language until about the 6th or 7th century.
Right.
They got from China. Yeah, that's when the written tradition started.
I
was going to ask you another. No, I just wondered if using Christ as a number one, as a year number, doesn't put tremendous psychological pressure on you to give Christ more than he deserves.
Well, first of all, I don't think they associate that with Christ. They associate with the West.
It's just with the West.
Yeah, not with Christ per se.
But I wonder if that kind of association is nevertheless inside it kind of doesn't it give it a kind of a credibility that he might not deserve in terms of Japan?
まあその西洋年号はもうほらキリスト教から Japanese are very eclectic and very selective, and they only chose to use that. They don't even use it 100%. So they only use it partially for some things, but they only chose to use it as an expedient. They don't identify it with Christ or use it as an excuse to glorify or attach any more importance to Christianity than is needed. So it's just used as an expedient.
Okay.
Yeah, they just borrowed it for their own purposes.
Right.
They don't.
What I found is that as somebody who is not a Christian, but I love Jesus Christ, but I don't like Christianity. I don't like the way that it's grown up. But as somebody who feels that, I feel that a tremendous subtle downward pressure on that number, because I'm always thinking in terms of Christ. Because I love ancient history, I'm always thinking in terms of before Christ. I spend my days writing down so-and-so BC. So if you do spend your days writing down BC, you're always putting it down. There's always this acknowledgement of Christ's existence. You know, that's
history, though. I mean,
Oh yeah.
As followers of pop music, we tend to think of stuff as before the Beatles and after the Beatles. So. It's just historical.
Yeah, you're right.
It has nothing to do with like the value of the Beatles. It's just things changed. Changed in a major way.
But the thing is nevertheless, whether it is to do with the value of the Beatles or not, you'll find people who hate the Beatles will resent the fact that people think before and after the Beatles, and they might actually resent the Beatles more than they naturally would if the Beatles didn't have that psychological beginning of rock and roll.
Yeah.
That's all I'm interested in, really. That's why I was there.
さて、話を元に戻してじゃないですか。
There's a new band in the UK called the Street Manic Preachers.
Manic Street Preachers,
Manic Preachers, I'm sorry. Who've been making comments to the effect that, like, they want to tie themselves up and explode along with rock and roll. So the end of the world type of attitude. The question is, what do you think about newcomers like this and their rather pessimistic message? If indeed you're aware of it at all.
No, I know about the Manic Street Preachers. Yeah, they've been almightily slagged because they're kind of a new punk group in the kind of the early Clash kind of Sex Pistols thing. Unfortunately, they suffer in a way because everybody in Britain is into this acid trip. So it's okay to be into the late 60s, but not the late 70s.
Oh, I see.
Yeah? So they just fall foul of that. Unfortunately, they do themselves no favours by being incredibly shit. They're one of the worst groups I've ever heard. they're a terrible group, and they're very, the songs are weak, etc., etc. I personally think if they were good, I'd love them. But they don't do their cause any good by being terrible.
そのバンドに限って言えば I guess I've said in the past that you have sort of a reverence for Jim Morrison, Iggy Pop, those guys, and watching your performance, he does see that reverence manifested. Do you still believe in rock?
Rock and roll as
an ideal, I guess?
Yeah. What I love about rock and roll is that it's now been round long enough to it's fallen out of its rebellious function into a new function. Ideal entirely in terms of rock and roll. I think I'm quite a traditionalist in a way. I think that rock and roll, the early days are, I think, say the early 60s, when first rock and roll first started to get challenging, like intellect, to have a bit more of a than just the yawp that people had in Little Richard's day. I think there was an element of people taking on, say, the trappings of, say, the metaphysical poets, T.S. Eliot, but Robert Graves, people like that. I think that you started to get people like Morrison, who were truly saying something. I think my reverence for Morrison is because he had absolutely no fear of being an asshole. And I think the greatest artists have no fear of being an asshole. But what I do love is that I like to deal in rock and roll imagery. The album couldn't have been called Peggy Suicide unless people knew that there was a very famous rock and roll iconic song called Peggy Sue. I've got a new song about the death of God, which is a follow-up called That'll Be the Deicide. It's a thing. I can play an intellectual game at the same time, and people will understand. So I can use the fact that people like Mick Jagger and Paul McCartney, as much as they fuck up and everybody go, ooh, that was bad, they're the pioneers of age. People in the 1960s said, yeah, but you'll never get a rock and roller who's 30. That's because there weren't rock and rollers who were that old. I'm sure in the 30s they said, you'll never get a blues man who's 30. Now they're 80. The great thing is that those people pioneer all the bullshit out the way. I can do my thing when I'm 80. Nobody would ever have said, well, you can't do, you can't be like William Burroughs when you're 80. You can't have a history of extreme anal sex and heroin taking, because people don't do it. You can. But I don't feel myself that I'm creating a brand new genre every time. A lot of the time, I say to my musicians and my producer, we're working within tremendously restricted parameters. I think the greatest music accepts its restrictions. A lot of the time, I will directly rip off an old song. I will take the riff, and the reason that I'm happy to do that is because I found that a lot of the time I will have written a song which I thought was entirely original, and somebody will play me something and say, oh, you got it from this song, and I won't have, but nevertheless I must have. So if I'm not doing it consciously, I'm doing it unconsciously. So I got a kind of an acceptance of that.
Did you call it Fried, I guess?
Fried, yeah.
Yeah. You said that probably for you represented a emotional, physical kind of a low, a nadir of sorts, whereas the last one was almost sort of a what you call it?
Yeah, zenith.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And whereas now like the pendulum has swung again, and now you're kind of in the middle and more of a free flow, natural, easygoing type of stage. Is that the case? Or has the pendulum swung all the way up?
I think that the way that I describe myself at the moment is full on. My best. I feel incredibly alive, but I feel incredibly alive because I feel like I have a role. I know what my role is, and I very rarely know what my role is. My next album's called Julian Cope, and it's. Do you want to tell him that, and then I'll carry on?
Well, yeah, it takes a while to explain.
Okay. The interesting part about that is that somebody told me that H in Japan means kinky.
That's right.
Yeah? My reason for calling the album Julian H. Cope is because I've always been obsessed with the cross, right? As an anti-Christian, I was just as obsessed with the cross as when I got baptized and felt that I really wanted to be part of Christianity. I'm obsessed with it whether it's negative or positive. Then I found that the Christian cross started in 0, yeah? The Celtic cross has been traced back to 1500 BC. I flew over an ancient monument in the north of Scotland in the Outer Hebrides called Killarney, which is built, its ground plan is a cross, and it's 3100 BC. So that's putting it in an entirely different dimension. I got this book by a guy called Jacob Streit, who's a Christian mystic, who says, as a Christian, he has to admit that the Christian church's grabbing of the cross and saying it's for us is a very incorrect thing to do. The cross, he said, I've actually read this in The Secret Doctrine by Madame Blavatsky. The cross as an image is very different from the image of the cross with a man hanging crucified from it. There are two different things. The cross, in Neolithic terms, there would be, the community would worship within, say, the stone circle, say Stonehenge or something like that, would worship within there. There would be an altar stone, which was, say, 30 or 40 yards away. The priest would stand at the altar stone. When the sun came up on the summer solstice, it would rise above the altar stone, and the altar stone's shadow would be cast into the circle. The priest would stand there, accepting the sun, like this. So the cross became the man, which is kind of really beautiful, and it's less limiting. So I wrote a poem about it, which I thought was a kind of very, very simple, and all it just says, Jesus Christ is not the cross. The cross is a representation of man standing, arms outstretched, accepting the creation. The cross is universal. The cross is all supreme. The cross is mankind stretching up and out of his waking dream. And what I'm saying is this. The cross is such a beautiful image. This should be for everybody. People who don't like the cross pay too much attention to it by spending all their time inverting it and all this kind of stuff, tremendously empowering it in their own way. And people who love the cross and love Christianity empower it too much the other way. So what you've got is man and his symbols, Carl Jung's man and his symbols images, that they are massively important. They have this incredible psychological effect on us. What I'm trying to do is just shed some more light on why we feel this way about something which is an ancient symbol.
It's something for all of us now.
It's something for all of us,
not
yeah.
one group trying to collect power.
Yeah.
それで
その時を
占って